Here we go. We're on our way. I know.
Okay, since I died, we're not grief counseling.
Sort of smell it.
Yeah, no kidding. All right. Just as a bit of an introduction, I'm hearing from lots of different people that there's lots of struggling going along. People are kind of feeling some of the feelings that they haven't felt for years. They're tired all the time. They're cold. They're kind of getting not feeling well. Lots of things going on. And I want you to know that that's totally normal. It's okay to be struggling right now because we're getting into some really deep stuff, right? We're talking about things that happened a long time ago that maybe we haven't allowed ourselves to feel. And then we're starting to talk about them, so we are starting to feel them, and it's getting a little bit heavy at times. Especially when Tim was here last week, he gets into lots and lots of stuff. So I just want you to kind of put your brain a little bit on hold tonight, because we're actually going into a topic called grief. I'll write it up here. But this is what we're going to be talking about with our clients is, especially those who have just started, okay? Grief is on a Monday. If you look at the schedule at the very beginning of your notes, I think it's on week 4, day 1. So those people that are starting on week 4, day 1, this is their very first topic they're going to hear. So we try to encourage people, if they start to feel some of these emotions, this grief and stuff, you need to put it on the back burner. Reason we tell them that is, especially if they've come out of addictions and stuff, they've never learned how to have the tools to deal with grief. All the losses that they have, they just kind of numbed and avoided. Kids growing up in complex trauma, they were never given the tools, so they don't know how to process grief. So especially if it's their very first day, their very first week, we tell them just really, we're learning this as an academic thing. We're going to talk about grief, all the different kinds of grief, how to grieve in a healthy way, how we normally grieve in an unhealthy way, but we're going to just kind of touch the surface as a whole. So I tell you guys this as well because a lot of you probably have a lot of grief in your life. Most of us do, it's part of life. So we're going to go into a very academic kind of an overall of grief, but if you need somebody to talk to afterwards or over the weekend or next week, Brittany and I are available if you just want to sit and talk about something that's going on, some grief, or any of the other discussions that we've had in the last 5 weeks. Yeah, 5 weeks. We are always available. We do our evening classes, but Britt and I are pretty much available anytime during the days. So feel free that you don't have to do this alone. We can walk alongside you and help you with some of this stuff. Okay?
I have a question.
Yes, please.
How do we get a hold of you guys? Do
Um,
I do the email?
It's a very good
Yeah,
question.
the email has been sent out.
Yeah.
Or you can just approach us after class or
Okay.
whatever.
Yeah.
Or I'll even write up my number on the board after.
Yeah, and then I can text you.
Do you have a new number or the old one? Oh, I don't even know your old one. I just push a button on my phone, right? I don't know what your number is. All right, so just as a beginning part of grief, it's a universal experience. We all experience grief. We all have losses in our life. We're not just talking about somebody dying. There's all kinds of losses that most people aren't even really aware that they're losses and that they have to learn to grieve them. So that's what we're going to go through today. We can't control the process. It happens. And we're going to talk about all the stages of grief. I'm sure all of you know the stages of grief. But we're going to be kind of the process that is going to take us individually and help us work through grief. But it's not something that you can predict what's going to happen or how it's going to happen. So we have to talk about in addiction of any kind. Grief is one of the biggest triggers that will send people back out because it's just so overwhelming of an emotion. It's one of the most intensive emotions. And so it's important that they learn that we need to talk about it, deal with our grief, so that it doesn't take them out in the long run. All right, so we're going to start talking about the types of losses. And And I know you guys all have your notes in there, but don't read ahead and know all the answers yet. The first one is relationship losses. Okay? So there's all different kinds that you may not even be aware that are losses, but we're going to start at the beginning, and of course there's a death of a loved one. Okay? That's kind of the one we think of when we think of losses, and it could be anybody even close to you. I actually never knew anybody who had died until I was 22. None of my grandparents or relatives or friends or nobody had ever died until I was 22. So my parents actually took me at 22, took me to a real remote stranger that I didn't really know, somebody from our church I'd never spoken to, took us to the funeral because they knew that wasn't a healthy thing, right? We didn't have any tools for dealing with somebody who had died, so they took us to a stranger's funeral just so we could see what it was kind of like before somebody died. I think I was 27 when my grandfather died, so that was kind of my very first loss. But that is a really big one. If it happens to somebody who's young, a child, it can really, really affect them. It can also lead to a fear of death. And people who have that really intense fear of death, if you look back, they probably have had a death with somebody when they were quite young. The second one, and I've got them listed there, is divorce, separation, a breakup, or friends growing apart. So those are all relationships that it kind of, the divorces and the separation and even breakup of somebody you've been dating for a long, long time. What that does is the loss is the future that you had planned together. All those things that you had decided you're going to settle down, have a family, move to a certain place, your careers were all going to be, and then all of a sudden there's a divorce, and all those plans you had in the future are all crashed. So it's a loss, and it's a really, really big one because it's almost like your future has died. So it's a really, really big one that we need to be aware of. Third one is abortion, miscarriages, and barrenness. A lot of people in addiction, well, because they're in the addictive field, you know, they've been raised in really dysfunctional families, have tons of complex trauma. Many of them have abortions, or they have 7 or 8 or 10 children or whatever. But abortions seem to really take people out. They go into that guilt phase of, you know, I couldn't handle it at the moment, so I've had an abortion. But this comes up years and years and years later. Whenever they see a child, they feel that guilt and that sense of loss that they had a baby and then they didn't have one. Miscarriages is the same thing. It can be really, really traumatic for not even just the women, for the men as well, because they were anticipating a child being born into their family and then there isn't one. It's a huge loss. But barrenness is one that we hardly speak of. There's many people who have trouble conceiving. My sister couldn't have babies. Her husband was sterile. And she grieved for they tried for about 4 or 5 years before they adopted babies. But those were the worst years of her life. Just that thought that I can never have a baby, a physical baby. In fact, Mother's Day came around and she went into a deep depression because you go to church and it's all about the wonderful mothers and it's a special service for the moms. So she had to stop going because it was just too painful for her to see all the other mothers who were happy, they had their babies, their little children. So that's just something that we don't often think about, but it's a huge loss. Yes?
What about, people, well, I know that I experienced when I was growing up, a loss of grandparents, because I never had it. They all died by the time I was 3 months old.
Oh, right.
So I didn't know what grandparents were.
Right.
Until, of course, school.
Right.
But,
Oh, yeah.
so where would that fall?
That would probably fit under here because eventually you came to a point where you realized you had a loss because you never had grandparents.
Right.
So then when you went to your friends' places and they talked about grandma and grandpa, there was that deep sense of loss. But I mean, as you're getting older, you realize what you've lost.
Yeah.
Yeah. You wouldn't have been aware as a child, but as you got older, you
Yeah.
realize what you missed out on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really sad. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm over it now, but you know.
Yeah.
It was
But
just
still,
it was a point where I was looking at pictures and I'm like, who's that? And oh, well that's my dad's mom, or that's my dad's. It wasn't my grandparents.
Right, because you didn't know them as
them,
such.
so-
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, that's a huge loss. Okay. The next one is abandonment. CFS. And parents getting a divorce. Okay? So those are all when a child is fairly young and they have all these things happen in their life where they, and again, it's the similar thing as when they start to have friends and they go to their friends' houses and it's an all intact family and they got brothers and sisters and they talk to their grandparents and all that stuff. And then children who, especially when their parents divorce, they start to realize the loss that they have because they never really realize it until they get to be with other people who have these intact families. So children in these situations start to feel fragmented. They know that there's parts that don't go together very well. They're, especially the abandonment one, being given up. Mom's too busy doing her thing, so it gives it away, gives the child away to grandmother to raise, and then grandmother can't handle them, so they send them over to an aunt or an uncle to raise. Those are all abandonment issues. They've just never felt really loved and cared
Does
for.
everybody know what CFS is?
Oh, sorry.
That's the-
Child and Family Services, that's from Winnipeg. Tell me again what you call it here.
Social services.
Yeah.
DSS.
MCFD.
Ministry of Children and Family Development.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, CFS being that one. And that's when a child is put into a system. They feel that sense of abandonment, of course, because mom and dad can't take care of them, either for legitimate reasons or non-legitimate reasons. But especially we have lots of people in our program who have been put in foster care, put into Child and Family Services or MCFD, and they're being put, and then mom comes to get them out and she's going to get her act together, and then she relapses, the kids go back into a different foster home, different situation. So those are huge losses when they start to realize what their life is really like and what it should have been like. And I think the point is they should have had, every child deserves to have a healthy, happy family life. And when they start realizing they don't, for all these various reasons, it can be a huge loss. And mostly kids will never learn how to grieve all this stuff until they get into their adult life and start to learn the healthy tools, or they continue to numb and avoid all the pain by all their addiction stuff.
Down here, you've got the flip side of that too.
Okay.
The parents giving up their
Parents
kids
giving up, yeah.
because they lost their kids.
And so they've lost their kids, yeah. And so that's a
that
whole,
is huge.
Yes.
It's one of the
Yeah.
hardest things, and
Yeah.
it's huge.
yeah. Well,
Because there's so much guilt and
The-
shame
the guilt that goes along with it, yeah.
You know, and it's just like, everything reminds them of that.
yes,
Sort of like,
yeah.
it's an unwritten rule, you cannot talk about kids. Anybody
Okay, yeah.
cannot talk about kids when somebody's using.
Right, right.
You just won't. You
Really, eh?
just cannot do it.
Yeah.
It's the unwritten rule, don't talk about kids.
Yeah.
It's too painful, yeah. And that's the thing that's probably, with an addict who has kids, that's probably their worst guilt and pain.
It is,
If their
it
kids
is,
are not in
because
their care.
anything that they inflict upon themselves
Right.
is, but it's the whole.
Yes.
huge.
And again, when we're talking about all this and with our clients, especially if it's their first couple weeks, I mean, they are overwhelmed with grief when they see all the things that they've done to their kids and abandoned them and all the things. Oh, it's really, really hard for them, really hard. All right, number E. Okay, the next one is a child who grows up where their 12 needs are not met. We've gone through the 12 needs and what a child needs to have a healthy, normal life. And if those needs aren't met, their parents aren't available for them, either physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, then they have that sense of loss when they start to realize what other families are like and what they should have had as children and never did get. So they were raised in a home that was not a healthy, happy home, and then they start to realize that, and that's really hard for them to accept. A child who has possibly a military family or some other family where they move all the time, like every few months they get kicked out of their apartment, have to find somewhere else to live, a constant turnover of where they're living, where they're moving, that is a terrible loss for kids. And again, when they start to go to school and see what their other friends and all the people are like, they start to realize some of the things are hard, but they often can't deal with it until they get to be adults because they don't know how to deal with that sadness that they didn't have what their friends had. So at that point, they're kind of missing their roots. They don't have anywhere to put down their roots, and so they're just kind of, floating along and basically just surviving. G is the empty nest. It is a loss, and I can attest to that. I went into it, I've only had depression twice in my life. They were situational. One of them, the second one, was when my youngest daughter, who was 16, got her license for the first time, and all of a sudden my job as a mother chauffeur was over. That's when I had all those wonderful times with my kids in the car. We lived in the country, so we were driving all the time. She got her license, got herself a little car, and all of a sudden I went into a depression. My kids didn't need me to take them anywhere anymore. They were becoming independent, they were doing their own thing. And all of a sudden, they didn't all move out at that point, but then when they all moved out, all of a sudden that phase of being a mom with kids in the home was over. It was really hard. It took me a long time to get over that. It's a real loss. I mean, it's part of life and we all know that, but really, really hard for some people. Some people can't wait to move them out, right?
I have no problem with it.
Yeah, you can't wait, right?
I'm wondering,
Okay.
my friend, she had 2 boys.
Yes.
When her youngest son left, it's kind of also to, I think the husband, like his son was, I don't know, whatever, and he kind of kicked him out
Okay,
for a while, and the mom, that kind of, then came back, but then he left, for good.
right.
After that, and she was just unconsolable, and
Oh,
she
yeah.
plunged to the depths of despair.
Yes.
And it doesn't help that it's during that time of the woman's life.
Yeah, no kidding. How fair is that?
Yeah, dealing with it, so it's kind of a compounding effect. But I'm wondering if it is, like, I have 2 daughters, and it's funny, because as soon as they moved up, they were home more than they were, when they
Yeah.
were at home. 'cause
Well, that's
they went,
interesting.
"What's for
Yeah, there
dinner?
you
What
go."
are you guys having?"
Raise your pantry.
Looking, yeah. Raise the pantry,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's funny, because when you have daughters, I think it might be a little different.
Maybe. Yep, all different scenarios. But it's definitely a loss. What?
They don't ever actually leave.
Well, I have a daughter that just moved to BC and another one in Germany, so they do leave eventually.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I have to leave Australia, so.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, look at it, you got places to
Well, I was
visit.
gonna say.
Yeah, that's right. It's not the same. All right. A favorite pet?
Yeah.
Okay. Who's responding? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so tell me about your pet.
Moose.
Dog?
She was a chocolate lab, yeah. She was a good dog.
Yeah. How long did you have her?
Her entire life.
Yeah.
Her entire life. And, yeah, no, I missed her. I had dreams about her for a while.
Oh,
when she
yeah,
was
I bet.
gone.
Yeah.
It was the only child my ex-husband and I had.
Oh, yeah.
So, and a lot of people really, they pick a lot of the pets.
Oh, yeah. Pets are real. Well, the thing with a pet too is if it's with a child, is that child will tell anything to their pet, right? It's a listening ear, it's a loving, comforting thing. They know they'll never,
Reject
judge them, reject them, any of those things. So pets are a really big thing for kids.
I wasn't even a kid, I was an adult.
And you were an adult, yeah.
I talk to my dog all the time.
Oh, aren't they wonderful,
She could
comforting
tell
things?
all I had to say, she could tell by the tone of my voice what I wanted.
Yes, of
Or if I did this with my head, or that,
Yeah.
she-
Oh, for sure, yeah. We love our pets.
It's known that children who are survivors of abuse,
Yes,
they are more resilient if they have a pet.
I believe that, totally, yeah.
Yeah, 'cause, I mean, the thing about dogs is they love you unconditionally.
Unconditionally,
We used to
yep.
say, yeah, dogs and God.
Yes.
They get that unconditional thing.
Yeah. So think about somebody who's had a really tough childhood, and that dog has been with them forever, and then the dog dies. It's a huge loss. And the worst thing a parent can do is go and buy them a new one. You can't replace that. Hopefully nobody's done that, but if you have, apologize to your kids. That's about the worst thing you can do is just replace them. That pet was their soulmate. Yeah, exactly.
I think I'm still reading the loss of my favorite dog.
Doll. Oh, okay. Yeah, tell me about it.
Obviously, because my brother, I think it was the baby 4. Yeah, it's always Thumbelina.
Oh,
It was a what?
Thumbelina.
Oh, yes.
Right? She's soft-bodied, she's really cute, I love
Yeah.
her, I could talk to her, and I was in my imagination. But my brother Rob was playing cowboys and Indians and spray painted her green and stuff. So, as like,
Did you retaliate?
tragedy.
It is.
So, all my dolls actually, but that one was, and it just.
All your dolls.
It's like that guy in Toy Story.
Woody.
But I can remember nobody cared about my doll, because Rob was Rob and he just did stuff like that, and well, there's Rob again, So I was like,
Did he live to see tomorrow?
Yeah, right. So,
Yes,
question.
yes.
How did your mom respond? How did your parents respond?
Nothing.
Just not a big deal, get over it.
I don't remember any care or concern but that's the thing.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yikes. Yeah, they are very, very important to
Can I
us.
just quickly say,
Yes.
I'll give you my
Absolutely.
okay, they basically brought home our Bowsy home from the, I came home with Bowsy, they brought Bowsy home as well from SPCA, same day or whatever.
Okay, wait, who's Bowsy
My
and the dog?
dog.
Okay.
My pet dog, so anyways, grew up with them, just use my dog. And at 13, I'm looking on the house, I'm like, where's Bowser?
Yeah.
They're like, oh, we put him down. Oh, I'm like, what?
How
And my mom's
could
like,
you?
did you want him to suffer? I'm like, 13-year-old, so then that's how, so I was feeling guilty that I wanted him to suffer. Yes. So that was my experience with that.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, this
Grief and guilt at the same
grief and guilt at the same
I just
time.
didn't know how to do it.
So what did you do? Like,
I just
do you-
froze,
Yeah.
and went internal, and
Yeah.
just went away, and I was just like, it was like, wow.
Yeah.
Like, what did the dogs do wrong? I kind of like, I hope I you start thinking weird things,
Sure,
right? So-
sure. Yeah. See, back in the day, because we're similar
Yeah,
age, right?
Absolutely.
There was a lot of
Yeah,
stuff that went on
just-
that we just didn't
Parents
realize.
didn't want to deal with.
They didn't want to
talking
deal,
to kids
yeah.
about it, so.
Yeah.
As if I would know my dogs. Yes.
Oh, man.
Anyway, sorry, I just wanted to share.
No,
this.
that's a
It
good
is kind of a
example.
weird thing.
Yeah. So at some point, you may have to grieve that. Talking about it with us. First step. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. All right. The next one is going to start off our next section here. Those are the, oops, I shouldn't have taken that out. All right. So another type of loss, I'm going to put that one back in, is our relationship losses. This is another different one that we're going to talk about, loss of an aspect of self. these are all kind of the relationship ones, so they're the external ones. They're the ones with people, our pets, the people in our lives. An aspect of self is within ourself. So the first one can be the loss of health. So all of a sudden one day you wake up and you're not well, you go to your doctor, they give you some kind of a diagnosis. All of a sudden, something that we don't really think a lot about as we're, younger in our 20s and 30s. We don't think about our health, and then all of a sudden something happens and our health is at stake. So we have to grieve the loss of our health, especially if it's a long-term thing, something that's has an end like cancer or something that's, arthritis. I have arthritis too, so I know that eventually my arthritis is going to get worse as I get older. That's kind of one of the things. But health. Anybody want to discuss health? How does that feel? Exactly, right? It's a loss and it's a huge one, and we don't want to actually deal with it. It's tough.
Well, sometimes you can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
And I've had both my hips replaced, so I
Yeah.
can't do anything more about that.
Yeah.
And I've got degenerative arthritis in my spine.
Right.
I can't do anything about that except, back operation, that's where the nerves are, and
Yeah.
I don't wanna go down that route. So
No.
it's just like, you gotta just live with it.
Yeah. And living with pain, that other part, right? Living with pain is really, really tough. So that's a loss that's hard to deal with.
I used to go to the gym all the time. I used to run 10 miles a day. And I guess probably because I was just pushing it all the time, and I was working as a medical office assistant, and always, like I wouldn't have time to take a break, so I was constantly 10 hours straight a day, bent over, and then I woke up one morning and I couldn't move. I couldn't move my neck. I had to call the ambulance to get me out of bed. And they found out I had 2 herniated discs that were squeezing my spinal cord in my C-spine. So I ended up going to a neurologist, neurosurgeon. I had to go on to disability. And then from there, I ended up getting fibromyalgia, bursitis. Like all of a sudden, just everything just started piling up in the last 2 years. And it's like I still want to go to the gym, but if I just do like too much in one day, I can't. Like I just sleep all the time.
Right.
I have to have my naps. I call them my granny naps.
Yeah.
But it's just like I have to pace myself now, whereas before I was just so like crazy, and I've gained 60 pounds in 2 years. So it's like loss of everything.
Yeah.
It's
No
gone.
kidding.
Yeah.
Health affects everything else.
Yeah.
Huge loss. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it's big. The next section is, innocence due to some kind of sexual abuse. And they say this is the most difficult abuse. Not that I'm minimizing any of the other, but this is where a child loses their innocence, their sense of self. There's lots of repercussions that come out of that. I hinted before that I was sexually abused as about 11-year-old, and that was a really, really difficult thing. However, my mom dealt with it in a healthy way. She actually went across to the neighbor and screamed and yelled, and the whole neighborhood heard, and then he came to apologize. So, but most people don't get that kind of validation and support through those kind of things. So if they're not validated with it, and they just lose their innocence. There's that sense of that's all I'm good for, or I deserved it, or all the stuff, the guilt that goes along with it, and horrible, horrible stuff. So that's probably the worst. They lose their outlook that they're ever going to be happy again, that they're ever going to have a healthy relationships. Very, very difficult. Any comments? All right, here's another one. And this is where we lose the job that we've been trained for. We've spent years and years in school and doing our thing, and then all of a sudden you can't do that job anymore. And I have arthritis in my knee, I need it replaced, so I can never be an early childhood educator again. Because now I have arthritis in my neck and my knee, so I can't be on the floor and playing with the kids anymore. So I had to grieve that loss. That was something that I'd done for 30 years. So all of a sudden I can't do it anymore, and so I'm on disability. But it's I have to grieve that loss. I'm gonna have to find a different job, like working at rehab and stuff like that. So that's okay. It worked out well. I'm okay with it. Yeah, but a lot of people have come to the place where they've lost their job, they've lost their livelihood, they've lost all that, and so it's a deep loss.
A few years ago, I guess it was at the end of 2009, I lost my job. I had a very good job.
Okay.
And I was taking all the courses so that I could go up another step.
Mm-hmm.
And then the downturn in the economy, and I lost my job. And I applied, and they finished, the place I worked for, they actually paid for me to finish my university classes that I was taking.
Yeah.
And it was great. They were very good to me. But it was down, 3 of us at the management level were let go.
Wow.
And whenever the job that I was going for would open up, I would be applying for it in some other municipality.
Yeah.
And all across the province. It was offered to me way, way northern BC. But I would get an interview, or I wouldn't even get an interview. And I thought, what's going on? I should be a shoo-in. And you know what? It was like, I was sitting in church one time, and all of a sudden I heard God, I'm closing that door. And I still struggled. I still applied for that job, and I couldn't figure out, what is going on. I should be a shoo-in for that job. Everybody knows me. Everybody used to come to me in my other job.
Wow.
Everybody across Metro Vancouver. Anyhow, we'll fast forward to the present day. About 6 months ago, the job came open again.
Yeah.
And I knew the person I would be reporting to. I knew them very well. We used to work together. I thought, I'd probably get it. But boring. Because now I'm here.
Now you're going
to
She likes the chaos here.
Boring. Elected officials are boring.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so you understand that loss.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
Yeah, it is.
It takes a while to work through
It's
it.
just like I couldn't get it. Even after I heard God tell me I'm closing that door.
You're still working on it, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, I hear you. Amazing. All right, the next one is a dream. So you had a dream, a marriage, falling in love with somebody, a career like we just talked about, having children, the white picket fence, moving to Vancouver Island, a quieter life, like all the dreams that we have, right? When that's lost, it's a loss, and we have to acknowledge it and talk about it and have other people validate those feelings, because it is a real loss. All right, the next one is mental health issues. So most of the mental health issues that we deal with our clients is depression and anxiety. So just imagine as you're going along doing your happy things and then depression hits you. There's a loss to that because you're losing that life that you thought that you were living. You thought you were normal, everything was going to go really smoothly, and then it takes you out and you're in bed for 2 months. It happens, and people have to accept that's part of their life, but they don't want to, right? Depression is a really hard thing to get out of. So at that point, a lot of people go on medication. A lot of people don't want to go on medication for depression. So they feel like that's a loss. I'm not able to cope on my own. I should be able to handle all this. So all those things come along with it. But it is a definite loss. Dreams you're working towards. And I always use the example of the Olympians, right? So they work for 4 years, sometimes 8 years to be at the top of their field, to do the very best they can, and they train 8-10 hours a day, every day for 4 years. They go to the Olympics, and this is where my heart breaks. They trip on the platform, or they trip on somebody else, or they fall, or whatever it is they do. Can you imagine how crushing their dreams are? I mean, they worked for 4 or 8 years to get to that spot, and then just something happens and they don't. Yeah, Jim?
I take it from what I heard that even Olympians who win the gold medal, like they still grieve the loss of their sport because they're onto something else, or
Yeah.
they know that they've peaked. And
Yeah, they've peaked and they're
changed
not going to do
gears.
it again. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good example. Yeah,
Yeah, almost where do I go from here?
right. Yeah, what's the next step? It's a whole different phase of life. Yeah. All right, then we have G is our identity. Now, we've talked about this ad nauseum. Coming out of complex trauma, we don't know who we are. We've numbed, we've avoided, we don't have any of the tools to deal with life. So we get to a point where we don't even know who we are anymore. We don't have an identity. And once we get into recovery and come to the REACT program and learn all the stuff that we're supposed to be learning and all the tools, all of a sudden they realize that they've had that loss. They've never been a real autonomous person. They've never had their own individuality. So they feel like they've never had it, and there's that loss of, I missed out on, being a 12-year-old kid, being a hockey player and being out there doing my thing. I could have been doing that. Instead I was, breaking windows at the gas station and whatever happened. So once they start to identify that they've lost that identity of themselves, that's just one more loss. I think we're going to take a break.
Do you think like, you say the aging, like how that's, like
Oh, for sure. That would be under health, right? We don't sleep as well, our knees hurt, we can't run as fast, going on and on and on. It's part of aging.
Oh, yes.
Lots of goodies.
Yeah, let's go on to the third type of losses.
Sit back here, I'll go sleep.
I wrote it here, we have losses due to addiction. So, the first loss due to addiction is self-respect. And almost everybody who's gone into that unhealthy behavior, they've had to break their values and morals that they said they'd never do. So they go down to that real self-loathing of not having any respect for themselves anymore. That also goes into the spiritual piece. So the morals and values are not there anymore. They don't feel that God is even going to love them anymore because they've had to break all their values and morals due to the addiction. So self-respect is a big loss. Many of them, there's a loss of freedom. When they go to jail or they're on probation of some sort, they can't go out and do what they want. They have to check in all the time, or they're in jail. So that is a loss. All of a sudden, they're not with their kids anymore. They're not able to see their families. So that's another loss. There's another one. Another loss due to addiction is your health. So they haven't seen a dentist for 20 years, their teeth are falling out, they don't see doctors, you just don't get a lot of help, you're not even bathing regularly, so you get sores on your arms. I mean, all kinds of things that happen when you're living on the street, or the meth thing with the face going all scaly and scratchy. And I just saw on Facebook actually yesterday, they had a 10-year pictures of one woman from when she was healthy. Did you see that one?
Yeah.
Healthy, and then every year she took a picture. By the time she was 10 years older, and the 10th picture, she looked like she was about 30 years older, and she was all haggard and worn. Very, very, very sad. And that was only in 10 years of being in addiction.
Was
Yeah.
it police pictures?
Mugshots.
Yeah, mugshots.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yearly mugshots.
You
One way to get your
can get your
pictures.
picture taken.
Active.
next one is the loss of money. Drugs are expensive.
So is divorce.
So is divorce. Yeah, well, exactly, yeah. So you're getting divorced. You've lost your job, you don't have an income anymore, you lose your house, you lose your car. You just lose everything when it comes to addiction. So money is a big one because then there's that sense, if you've been raised in that sense that you're only valuable for what you contribute, you know, and what you do with your life. If you're in addiction, you have that as a loss as well. E is relationships. So that's friends and family, and I put along there as well trust. We've lost trust. So nobody trusts us anymore. We get ourselves clean and sober and we expect them to trust us immediately, and it doesn't happen. Trust takes a long time to rebuild. So there's that sense of loss, that how long is it going to be? Are they ever going to trust me again? Yes?
And community.
Community, yes, you can put that in there as well. Community. Church communities, people that you work with, all kinds of Christian communities, volunteer communities, everything. Relationships are broken.
And then when they get off the street, they face the same situation.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Another thing that people struggle with a lot is the wasted years. We had a woman come into our group about a year ago, I guess, and she had been in the problem for 45 years. So she started doing whatever at, 10. She was in a really, really abusive situation. So 45 years later, and she came to React, and I think it was about day 3, and she went, how come I've been in the programs, every program in Winnipeg, and I've never heard all this stuff before. So she started to get healthy and learning new tools, but she really grieved that loss. All the wasted years, the relationships that she never had with her family, her parents had died already by that point. She never resolved her relationship with her family. So the wasted years and the wasted potential, what she could have been, what she could have done, the healthy, happy home she could have provided, jobs and relationships and community and all that stuff. So she really, really had a hard time with that.
Have safety in there too.
Safety, yeah, loss of safety, sure, we can put that in. G, safety. And I was actually going to get you to add another one that wasn't on your notes. I found it in one of my other notes, is a loss of sanity. So people come into their, into addiction, and then they realize that they feel like they have a twisted reality, that nothing is real. So they've lost their sanity through the whole thing. Sanity. So safety, I'm actually going to write that down. That was a good one, Jeff. And I will add that to my notes.
For some people, it's all of the above.
Or all of the above, yeah. Some people have to deal with all those losses. So when we start talking about losses, I think Tim does a week on grief? No, a whole week on grief downstairs. When they start talking about all these things, and they'll take one thing and talk about self-respect, they'll talk about that for an entire hour, and then they realize all the losses they have on just that one point. And you see that we're going through all these lists of all the different losses you can have. And most people in addiction have lots and lots of losses that they've never really even identified. So it's really scary.
So many people in shelter, I mean, their things are, either they lose their things or they're stolen.
Yeah,
Cars
stolen
stolen.
too, yeah, exactly.
And, I've seen people get very upset.
Oh, yeah, definitely, yeah, for sure.
That's why a lot of people hoard too.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's gotta be a lot of that. All right, we're gonna go on to the losses due to being clean and sober. You're gonna go, what? Yeah. All right.
No, it's in the high.
Yeah.
I've heard that from people
Because
in recovery.
you remember the brain work that we did in the first few days? They will never get back to the high that they received the very first time. That high is unattainable, but they spend their life trying to get that high. It'll never be what it was, but they spend their life doing it.
Same as a drug.
Yeah, for sure. So they know that they'll never experience that again when they're in recovery, and that's a loss. They feel like they're, what's life worth living if you don't have that dopamine anymore, right? All right, this is a big one. Their friends, the chaos, and the lifestyle.
A lot of them go back.
That's why a lot of them go back, because they're lonely. So you think about your drinking buddies. You've been doing it since you're in high school, you're in your 50s at this point, and every weekend you'd go and get drunk at the bars, right? All of a sudden you're in recovery and realize you can't do that anymore. What about all those buddies that you hang out with? They're not ready to stop, they're still doing the lifestyle. But if you've got to say, no, I can't do that anymore, I mean, that's a huge loss. That's your whole life circle. That's all your friends and your acquaintances and the atmosphere of the bar atmosphere. Some people just love that, going and hanging out and doing their thing, and they have to give it all up. It's horrible for a lot of them. And like you say, Michael, they often choose to go back because life isn't worth living without
No, it's
them.
so lonely.
It's very lonely, yes.
I struggled with it
Yeah.
after being in the military.
Yeah.
And, you know, the high of always going and deploying and
Oh, sure.
being with, you know,
Sure.
you're with those people,
Yeah.
you trust them, and then you're
You trust them with your life.
life, and then you're here, and it's like Cityland. It's just great.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's not those highs and excitement and boring. Yes, I hear you.
Let's spend some time with Sums.
Yeah.
What?
It's like a war zone today.
Yeah, I hear there were a lot of people there today.
Where's
Wow.
that song?
I just a couple.
Some, just over on the corner.
No, it's got to
Sure,
go
your
on the
mission,
physical.
right at the street.
Yeah,
And
they
those
feed
balancing
lunch to
tray
people, they
while I
have
was
beds
doing
there in
it.
the evenings, and feed supper as well, and yeah, they take care of a lot of street people. Yeah.
And it's chaos.
And it's chaos.
I
Yeah.
like chaos.
You don't like chaos?
No, I like chaos. Chaos
Ah.
is good.
You fit
Yes, you must come visit us at Sums.
Yeah, you,
Another loss due to addiction is it's the way that we cope. So the drugs or the alcohol, the unhealthy behavior becomes your best friend. That's how you deal with life. That's what you go to first when you're triggered, when things are not going well, when you're bored. You know, it's just the thing that it's the thing that you go to. Your very first response is.
I
you go
saw
there.
a documentary
Yeah.
about a girl who was addicted to heroin, and she said flat out, heroin is my best friend.
Yes. Yes, we hear that a lot. It's their best friend because they can go there and feel like themselves. Yeah. Yeah, really tough. And D, just the example of never being able to drink socially again. So you think about all the things that we do in our society. You go out to a nice meal and there's often alcohol there. When somebody's coming out of addiction, they literally can't have it again. And we talked about those brain dopamine things. The minute they take their first drink, the brain readjusts and says, I know what to do with that, and they go up to that, and they need more and more and more. They can't just stop at one. So, anywhere you go, there's alcohol. Anywhere you go when you're a teenager, there's now going to be marijuana because it's legal. So if you're trying to cut out all that, what are you going to do? It's your way of life. You're never going to be able to do that again. So they're losing a lot of their losses.
It's not only not being able to drink, because after a certain point you just accept that
Yeah.
you can't drink it. So,
Right.
so you deal with that.
Yes.
But when you go places, you know, every time, every Thanksgiving,
Yes,
every
family
Christmas,
things, yes.
every gala.
Yes. Yeah,
No, it
it's
is.
true.
I mean, it's no matter where
It's
you go.
everywhere.
It's everywhere you go, all the time.
Yeah.
And yeah, and especially like for me, I was 42 years.
Right.
So like that's my whole life.
Yes.
And I basically had to say goodbye to everybody I knew from the time I was 13.
Huge loss.
42 years.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so you've seen the 4 different types of losses. just my comment at the bottom is sometimes losses come in groups. So if you're in recovery, you're gonna have to get rid of all this, and you might have some other losses at the same time. But then people are often surprised by how many losses they have. All these different facets of losses. It's just almost hard to imagine.
I think there is also a loss of freedom. I tried to help somebody get off the streets, and he felt like could not go back to normal life. He needed the freedom.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I'm not sure where that would fit under there.
Losses
due to addiction. Yeah.
That's correct. Losses to living on the streets.
Yeah.
That gives them freedom. And when they started signing people up for the modular homes,
Yes.
many people didn't sign up because it was gonna have somebody in charge.
Yes.
It was gated. They
Yeah.
said it was prison.
Yeah, and I heard somebody was saying that they couldn't even go inside a building. They have to be on the streets now. So even that was a real huge fear for them to go inside a building. So they couldn't live there. So where are they gonna live, right? On the streets. So yeah, lots of things that come along with that. Yep.
It's being comfortable with the chaos is the lawlessness.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or sometimes it's kind of like the opposite, like people that have been in jail for most of their life, they get out and they just want to go back because they can't handle it.
Because that was comfortable. They knew what to expect.
They had
Change
like,
is
rules
too
and
hard.
structure.
Yeah.
And you become institutionalized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You like that routine.
Yeah.
You thrive on
Yeah, definitely.
it. It's,
All right, we're going to talk about other types of grief. All right. So these are all different types of grief. It's not just a one-time event, you lose a pet, that kind of thing. There's different types. So we have our first one, and it's called conflicted grief. So conflicted grief is when you have two powerful emotions at the same time. And I wrote a couple examples there. Your father dies, so there's that horrible grief. However, he abused you growing up and was never a really good dad. So there's almost that sense of relief that he's gone and I don't have to deal with him anymore. So that's conflicted. There's a bit of a happy, kind of bit of a sad, lots and lots of powerful emotions that go along with that. We hear this one a lot. I don't know if you got number B there. The grandmother you stole from dies before you can make amends. We hear that a lot because people who are our clients, they've stolen from everybody because that's the only way they can get their drugs, alcohol, whatever they're using. And they've stolen from their grandmother, and then their grandmother dies, and they've never been able to prove to grandma that they can make it, that they're going to get clean and sober. And there's a huge conflicted grief there.
That's like survivor grief.
Survivor grief, yes, exactly. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. So I've made it through, but I can't show my grandma anymore. Oh, and suicide as well. Suicide is another one of the conflicted griefs. You're mad at them. You're not just sad that they've, ended their life, but you're mad, you're angry that they've done that. They didn't come to you. You're disappointed in how they dealt with them. All those strong emotions. So that's two different kinds of emotions that go with that. The second one is anticipatory. And that's when you know something bad is going to happen. You know you're losing your job. Evelyn was talking about that. You know that the job is ending and what am I going to do next? So you're anticipating a loss even before it's happened. So you start to actually go through the grieving process before it's even happened. Or somebody who's dying of cancer, the really bad kind, they're at the very end, and you know that eventually they're going to die, and so you start grieving even before it happens. We had a girl even just recently at React. Her dad died, and the next day she was back in the treatment center. And we're like, well, your dad just died. Oh, but I knew he was going to die 2 months ago. I started grieving then. I'm okay, I need to be here. So she came every day after that. Another type is delayed. And that's a tricky one because you don't really know when it's gonna hit you right between the eyes. Something bad happens, a loss of some sort, and there's hundreds of different kinds of losses, but you don't feel anything because you gotta kind of pick yourself up and get things done and do the next step and get a new job and all those things, and then you sit back and it hits you that I've lost this wonderful job that I had. It's delayed, it comes at a different time. Often, a lot of places that's, if it's an actual death of somebody, the big grief happens at the next event, like the next birthday party, the next Christmas, the next family get together, and it comes out all over again.
I think that's a protectionary measure.
Yes, yeah, you just can't handle it yet, so you kind of go into that numbing part. Number 4 is vicarious. And when somebody close to you has a loss, you actually feel the emotions just as intensely as they do. So that could be, you know, my boss actually lost her job, she was fired, and so I quit out of, I took a stand because they didn't do it in the appropriate way. But before I actually quit, she was grieving so badly, and I felt it so much because I was in that same position. What they did to her was terrible. And won't go into that. So 3 months later, I handed in my resignation and took a stand and said, I'm leaving because of what you did to my boss. But for those 3 months, I was grieving more for her and all her feelings, and I helped her walk through it and stuff. But I was surprised with how deeply I felt that. It was an injustice, right? Anything that violates love and justice, it was an injustice, and I felt that actually stronger than when I left the same job.
I have an example of
Yes.
that. I took my friend, like she was my best friend and her daughter, we went to, I was driving them to town, and there was a car accident. And we're like, oh no, like we're in the lineup. This was where I used to live. And so we had to like go back and go around the back roads.
Right.
And the whole time we were in town, like we were supposed to do all these things and she couldn't do nothing. And all of a sudden she was just like so tired, and I've never known her to be like sleepy. And I was like, do you want to just go back? And it was like after about an hour, she's like, I don't really want to go, I don't want to. And then she fell asleep on the way home. And when we were going like around the place where the accident was, we could see just all blood everywhere. And I was like, oh my gosh, like somebody passed away in this car accident. So we kept on going, and all of a sudden we were going past the gas station, and then her other friend was like honking, honking, honking. She had saw us on the highway, the Trans-Canada. And she stopped, so we pulled over on the side of the road, and her friend came, and she's like come on, come on. And she was just freaking out. And so she got out, and then her daughter got out to follow, like to see what was going on. And I had just put the car in park, and then I followed them, and I could just hear the last bits. What had happened was, it was her mom, her grandma, and her auntie all were killed instantly in the car accident. And she just like fell to the ground. Her daughter started running down the highway, and I was like, I just like went and got her, I put her in the car, and I helped her into the car, and she was like a really like big lady, but she just was so small, and she was just crying, and I don't even remember driving them home. I was in, like, I could just feel the grief so badly for both of them. Like even just thinking about it still, it's just, it was just the horriblest ever.
I bet.
Like all 3 of them.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. Really hard.
It must be difficult for her, like, because I find for myself, I don't want to attach to people because they die.
Oh yeah, that's
Right?
another whole thing, right?
So for
Yeah.
addicts, they must feel the same way.
Yeah.
They have that, why
Yeah.
do you really want to get connected
Yeah.
with somebody because who
Yeah.
knows when they go.
Right. Yeah, very true. And if you're on the street and you're an addict for many, many years, you know lots of people who have died on the street. Yeah, lots of people.
Another way we look at that though is the fear of abandonment, because you know everybody is gonna eventually abandon you, even if it's not intentional, right?
Yeah.
They're still gonna die. They're still gonna abandon you in some way. So that's kind of how we look at it in a different way.
Yeah, for sure. Number 5 is trauma grief. And that's when something bad happens and there's two different emotions. So you have a traumatic event, say a car accident, and then somebody dies from the car accident. So there's the traumatic event, you saw the blood on the road, it was a horrible thing to see, and then you had the grief of a bunch of people dying. I mean, so that's a really traumatic thing. So you're dealing with the trauma of seeing that, having nightmares about what you saw, the blood on the road, and then you also have the grief of somebody dying. Did you know them really well?
Yeah.
Yeah, you knew the people really well. So you had that trauma grief. Yeah. Really tough.
Which usually rears itself as anger or fear directly.
Yeah, yeah, very true, it does.
Anxieties.
Yeah.
And if you survived it too.
Then there's the survivor's guilt. All right, we're gonna do the grieving process. I know you guys all know it, so we're gonna go over it very quickly. Okay, number one, shock and numbness. You can't believe that this happened. You're going to kind of, I've seen some of that where you feel like you're outside of your body and there's that numbness and your fingers are tingling and you just can't believe it's happened. There's that shock. It's just overwhelming. You can't believe that it happened. And then denial, and the brain can't even function. It keeps thinking, people can actually respond by still talking about if it's a death of somebody. They still talk about that person's coming over next week and we're still having, I mean, they're in denial. They can't even accept that it's happened. Number three is anger. That's where they start blaming other people for what happened. The loss of a job, the anger gets really intense because somebody violated love and justice, and the anger takes over. If there's a death, it can be blaming the person for dying even though they didn't mean to. Then there's the bargaining, and that's the intellectual processes. That's where somebody was telling me the other day about a child being born sick and a person bargaining, you know, God, if you let my child live, then I will become a missionary or go into ministry, I'll do whatever you want, I'll become a Christian. Those things happen, there's that bargaining, and then of course, when the child gets better and gets well, then they forget about their part of the bargain. It's kind of the way it goes, right? Number 5 is depression. That's the sadness that takes over, all the things that I've lost. There's that disconnect from life. I don't want to feel anymore, so they just go into that deep depression where they can't do anything else. And then number 6 is acceptance. And that's just, it's not that it makes anything better, but you've learned to live with the loss. You accept that there are changes in life and you're going to go a different direction now. That's acceptance. So most everybody knows that process. All right, we're going to do this next section here, and then just so that you're aware, after the next break, we're going to do a check-in. We haven't done that for a couple weeks, so we thought we'd go around and give everybody 5-10 minutes to chat, talk about where they're at. Some of this grieving stuff causes some emotions to come up in all the other classes we've been doing, so we're going to do that as soon as we're done this section. So, we're going to start with unhealthy ways to grieve. Number 1 is, we learn that crying is a weakness, so we stuff the pain. So we pretend it doesn't bother us, it's not a big deal. Oh, we weren't good friends anyway, I don't care if she doesn't want to be my friend anymore. We stuff it down. That's not a good way to do it. Number 2, grieving should only take a few days. Yup, people actually say that sometimes.
A few years.
Yeah, a few years. Yeah, when it's a deep loss, yes, it can take a long time. Yeah. Now, Now, in a lot of cases, if somebody grieves a long, long time and they just can't get past that process of grieving, then other people around them start to think, okay, what's wrong? Why aren't you getting over this? Why aren't you moving past it? But we have to accept that people grieve different ways and for different lengths of time, and nothing is for sure. Some people say that it should be done alone. I need to just be alone with my grief. I don't want to bother anybody with it. So nobody really cares that I'm sad anyway, so I'm just going to grieve this the way I want to. So that's not a good way to grieve either.
It's the worst, actually.
Pardon me?
It's the worst.
It's the worst.
Of all
Yeah.
the unhealthy, it's the worst.
Yeah, it is definitely the worst, yeah.
But you dig into depression.
Depression, it goes into a lot of things, yeah.
You go into suicide.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. We distract ourselves. We can distract ourselves all kinds of different ways. I don't want to feel this pain. I want to just go on and do my own thing. People become workaholics through not wanting to grieve in a healthy way. They go into new relationships really, really fast. So if you break up with a boyfriend, the next guy's already on the phone and you're starting a new relationship, jumping from relationship to, that's just to distract us from feeling that uncomfortable emotion. We just don't want to feel it. So we distract. And number 5 is we medicate. We medicate the pain. And the thing about this one is that our culture finds that totally acceptable. You watch any of the TV movies or anything, when people are upset, what do?
Pills.
They go to the bar and they take drinks. They drink, they go to their closet and they get out the alcohol. Our society says that's totally okay. Every time we see that on TV or anywhere, it's like, don't do that.
Or you go to the doctor and get Valium.
Valium, yeah, sure, anything like that. Yeah. Yeah, very, very sad.
I don't know if it's on TV, but it's actually relatively common.
Yes, yes. So replace the loss with something else. So that's where we talked about as soon as you have a pet goldfish that you love dearly and it dies, and mom goes and gets a new goldfish and we pretend that it didn't die, you know? Just keep replacing it. Yeah, it just grew an extra leg, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I can tell what
But to somebody.
Yeah. All right, now we're going to do the healthy ways. This is what we have to get to. Healthy ways. 1, the only way, what we have to realize and what we have to tell our clients, because they have no tools for grieving, they don't know what to do. The only way to get through grief is to grieve. You know, all the unhealthy ways, that's not going to help you. It's just going to bury it deep. You're going to have a lot of health problems that come out of that. All the anxieties and the high blood pressure and all the things that we've talked about. The only way is to grieve. 2, grief can't be hurried or buried.
Or stuffed.
Or stuffed. Exactly. So the research says that it could take up to 2 years to grieve the loss of somebody really close, a really huge loss. Sometimes the second year is the hardest because the first year they're just trying to deal with all their emotions and all the situations that come along with it. Once the second year starts, then they start going through the birthdays and the Christmases without the loved one, and the second year is very often the hardest. People are really surprised when they hear that because they think they should be all done it very quickly. Each person grieves uniquely. We had friends of ours, they had a stillborn baby. I think the baby was 8 months in utero, and it died, and so they had a little funeral service for it. The wife grieved totally different than the husband. She grieved on and on, like we're talking 5-6 years. She was just stuck in this horrible, horrible cycle. She had 2 children after that, and those 2 children were totally neglected because the mom was spending, they had a little shrine in their house about this baby that they'd never really even met. The husband couldn't deal with that. He's like, he grieved, he did his kind of grieving, he went through several months of just sadness and whatever. They ended up in a divorce situation because he was saying, okay, you gotta get on with it, you gotta move on. We've got 2 other kids we have to look after, and all she wanted to do was just cry and grieve, and she refused any kind of medication or any help from anybody. All she wanted to do was, it's okay, I have to keep grieving.
That's
So-
already mental health.
It's what?
That's beyond grief, that's mental health.
Yes, that is a mental health issue. Yeah, she got really, really, really depressed and couldn't cope with life. She got really bad, yeah. But everybody does grieve uniquely, so you have to accept some of that as being okay, some of it is not. 4, it's important to talk to others. And talking to others is one of the healthiest ways, just to have somebody validate your feelings and talk it through. And even if you have to call them a week later and do it all over again, and then a week later and do it all again, if you have some good friends and support people, that's what you need to do, and that's okay.
The tricky part with this,
Yeah.
and I've seen this many times, sometimes somebody, has a death in the family and they're grieving, and people will actually say, they'll just kind of step backwards and say,
Right. They
"Stay
don't know
away
how
from
to
this.
deal with it."
I can't handle it."
Yep.
How do you talk to somebody that's grieving? People very often don't know.
Yeah, they're uncomfortable with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen it so many times.
Yeah, well, I bet. Especially with the people that we work with, right? They don't know how to deal with all that, it's too much.
No, I'm thinking people just in my regular life outside.
Oh, yeah, okay, okay, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
and it
Yeah.
always just sort of puzzled me. And I think, for those of us who are being supportive, mostly from my point of view, it's just kind of listening.
Right.
But, what do people do if they're grieving and need somebody to talk to, and people are just backing away?
Away
I don't
from
think-
them,
I
yeah.
haven't ever actually been
Yeah.
through this, but I've seen it happen to other
Yeah.
people.
Oh, for sure.
We're terribly culturally unhealthy around
Yes.
grief.
We
Yeah,
are.
it
Like-
seems like it.
It's like we're
Yeah.
kids
Yeah.
when it comes to grief. We just
Yeah.
don't get it.
Well, you think of some of the other cultures where they bring the dead body into the room, in the living room, and they have a service there and wailing and very emotional people. That's healthier than what we do. Totally.
That makes sense,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah, because then they can actually, have a whole group of people there, like a memorial service, but they express their grief and they're there to touch them, and yeah, we're very
In some
sterile.
culture, they actually hire people to do the wailing.
Oh, yes, that's
It
right.
helps them cry.
Yes.
Everybody
Yes,
cries.
Yes,
Sure.
yes, that's right too, yeah, yeah, yeah. We become very sterile, we have our caskets and our, everything's very distant. So yeah, very good point, Jim.
I was gonna ask how much they pay an hour, I'm kidding.
It's minimum wage.
They do pay them, don't they?
Yeah.
Do they pay them?
The length.
Yeah,
There
you
is a
pay.
better job than that.
When?
You can let people vent about their boss, and you charge them by the hour. And if you charge more, you even let them slap you.
Wow.
It's a good job. You don't need any-
If I can do the slap.
That is not affiliated with React.
Our final point is, when I grieve in a healthy way, it doesn't mean that later on down the road, I'm not going to start the process all over again and feel the pain and grief. And I'll just end with this one, and then we'll take our last break. Just one example. Tim's brother and wife lost actually twins when they were 5 months in utero. And it was a really sad thing because they'd been trying for years to get pregnant. They got pregnant, they were having twins, and then the babies died. So after they had, again, another little memorial service, and about 2 or 3 weeks later, Tim's grandmother, who lives up on the Manitoulin Island, and I wrote it down, it's a 7-hour drive from Toronto, where they were from, and said to Tim's brother Dave, Dave, you've got to come up. You've got to come up to Manitoulin Island. I need to be with you right now. So Dave, who was the father who lost the 2 babies, he and his wife drove up to Manitoulin Island. And as soon as they were coming down the driveway, this grandmother, who was at that point about 80 years old, went running down the driveway to just hold her grandson because she had lost a baby 50 years previously and knew what it felt like. And she sobbed and sobbed for this poor grandson who had lost those 2 babies. But she was also grieving for herself. She was still feeling it. Dave explained it to the rest of the family later on that she was feeling all the same emotions for her own child that she lost, not just for him and his loss. So that was 50 years later, and it all just came back as fresh and as real as it had happened that day. So it can come back again and overwhelm all over again, but then you start the process again, and it gets less and less frequent, the grief and the loss, but it does stays forever. Yes, totally helpful. Yes.
Just a point on some of the grief. I've been taught that part of it is like confrontation. So healthy grief can be sometimes confronting someone. That's part of the acceptance process.
Okay, yes, yeah, I can see.
But there is many cases where people have been forced into confronting, and that is by far unhealthy.
Yes.
That person needs to feel safe and secure to
Yes.
do that. But those are both things in grief that it's about releasing that emotion to somebody.
Yes.
And some people just write letters, some
Yeah.
people face to face.
Yeah.
But if it's rushed, it can be devastating.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, great. Yeah. Any other comments?
When I was about 8, and I hope I don't cry.
Oh.
My aunt died. She died from an ectopic pregnancy, and my cousins were 7 and 5. And it was very traumatic. And after she died, nobody spoke about it. Nobody mentioned it. We never talked about it. And yeah, and I remember it was just really painful. It was terribly painful. My aunt she was married to my dad's older brother. And my cousins were younger than I. And nobody ever spoke about it. And then about 4 years ago, I was just happened to be, I think it was my mom's Bible I was going through. She had all this, and I saw, oh my gosh, tomorrow's the anniversary of Aunt Margaret's death. And the next day, my cousin was emailing me about something. And I got up the courage and I said, how are you today? It's the anniversary of your mom's death. That's the very first time I ever said anything to him. And he says, yeah, I've been anxious all week, so today the anxiety will end.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was the first time I ever said anything. All those years. He was 7, I was 8. And yeah, it was traumatic.
Yeah.
It was really traumatic.
But to not
I mean, and I've lost my parents, I've lost a sister, I've dealt with those things, but that was something.
Really? Because it was never talked about. Thanks for sharing. Anybody else want to talk about grief? Okay, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get a chance to share.